I'm grateful to see everyone, and I'm very honored to be leading this great idea for innovation and practice, the secret lives of faculty and staff. Wow, that's a provocative, enticing name. Who wouldn't want to show up for that? So there's some of the secrets from the faculty and staff that we've got together today will include working with dreams, playing games, writing, rewriting, reconsidering novels, screenplays, and there'll be a little bit too on what matters most, which is a presentation that I'll give. Now, each of the presenters will have 7 minutes. We sure do welcome your questions in the chat. Please put those in, and we'll go one at a time. And we look forward to an engaging dialogue. And feel free to ask what's on your heart and mind, because this is a chance for us to talk as peers, as friends, as colleagues. And so we don't take time like this too often, so this is special. And so without further ado, I have the privilege of introducing Camille Minichino. Camille has been a faculty member since I've been here at GGU. Gosh, I've admired her work. Brilliant, is an incredible instructor, has really written the science, pedagogy and curriculum in undergrad and managed that for years, and is a real inspiration on many levels. And so I can't imagine a better person to lead us off than Camille, my friend. Good to see you. Long time no see.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nate, and also Sue-Ann and all the others who thought up this idea and is giving us the opportunity for this very rare, as Nate says, I've been at Golden Gate for 25 years, and so it's just a pleasure to participate in this way. So I've always been an avid reader of mysteries and crime fiction in general. Years ago, Sue Grafton, who is a very well-known and best-selling mystery novelist, recently deceased, I'm sorry to say, started a series with titles based on the alphabet. You may know some of them. A is for alibi, B is for burglar, etc. And I remember thinking, she only has 26 titles available. If I do the periodic table, I have 100 and counting. I could do that many novels. So I started with The Hydrogen Murder in 1997. The protagonist was essentially me, an Italian-American retired physicist who worked in a national research laboratory. In the book, she leaves California and returns to her home in Revere, Massachusetts. She takes up residence in an apartment over a mortuary run by her longtime friends. In the basement of her building is the embalming room. So here's where my next passion comes in, besides reading and writing mysteries. I'm a miniaturist. I make miniature models. So I have a photo, and I've already practiced this, so it should work. I have a photo of a miniature embalming room. So I'm going to share my screen. Nope, not going to share it yet. Hold on. I already made a mistake, so hold on a sec. I'm going to have to open the embalming room first. Don't be worried. Currently, there is no body there. Here we go. Can you see the embalming room? Yes. This is a model I made of an embalming room that's in the basement of her building, Gloria. Her name is Gloria. And so you can see some of this is made up of what we call found objects, like the little stool on the side of the table is really a champagne cover cork. And then I threw in the ruby slippers just for fun there. So that's one of the first models that I made that coincides with my writing. So I have the miniature models plus the periodic table, and I make a little model to go with each element. So I got as far as magnesium. number 12 in this venture of writing novels based on the periodic table, it's surprising that every element has something about it that leads to murder. In lithium, for example, there's lithium battery waste, which is very hazardous waste and controversial politically. In carbon, I have a veterinarian using a nano pharmaceutical on horses without FDA approval. So all of these are motives for murder, if you want, in the elements. So after I got to number 12, I switched to a new series based on a grandmother who's a miniaturist. And then I wrote 9 novels based on miniatures. And I'm going to, what I do with the models, since I would not live in a real house big enough to show them all, I donate to auctions at various schools and conferences, and they auction them off for libraries or whatever else. So I'm going to stop sharing that and try to share another image here. Let's see, share screen and share this. And this model is a cafe, a museum cafe, and I did construct a museum dollhouse, so to speak. And you can see here that the seats of the chairs are actually just bottle caps. And the table, the white table, that's what you get when you order a pizza, to keep the cover from that. So these are, again, all found models. One more of those, which is a full dollhouse. Let's see. Share screen and share this. This full dollhouse and the living room. Again, if you just sort of give me a thumbs up if you can see this full dollhouse in the living room, thank you. And so you see that at the bottom here, there's a living room that is a crime scene. So the furniture is turned over, there's a crime scene tape across the door, and there's a bloody candlestick. And the scale on all of these is 1 to 12. It's a standard dollhouse scale. Every inch of real life represents 1 foot. I mean, every inch in the dollhouse is 1 foot in real life. So it's 1/12 scale. I have a slideshow on my website. If you like more of those, I'll send you the link and you can see all the ones that I've done over the years. A puzzle room, a campaign headquarters. I won't tell you whose, lest you be biased against me one way or another. But so I have all of these ideas for that. Then, of course, I after 9 of these books with Penguin, now Penguin Random House, trying to be also Simon & Schuster, as you know, big publishers are eating up littler ones. And even big publishers like mine, Penguin, are eating up big ones like Random House and Simon & Schuster. I have another series called the Professor Sophie Knowles series. This one is about a woman who teaches math at New England College, which of course I've done. As I said, I'm turning my life into a series of novels. The 5th series is a postmistress series, and I did a small replica of a post office to go with that. So, and on, and in all, I've written and published traditionally, meaning outside of my own venue, 28 novels and short stories and so forth. So I'll show you one more. I think I'm within my 7 minutes, although I didn't start my time clock. But let me show you one more.
You got another 2 minutes to go.
What's that?
Another 2 minutes to go.
Oh, good. Okay. Here's another share. I can get it. Share screen. Share. And this is a Christmas scene that I just finished. It will be my Christmas card. The window on the left will be replaced by a portrait of me, and the window on the right will be replaced by a portrait of my husband. And I don't have that file right now, but you can see with this Sharpie marker, another way to give you the scale of this. Although one of my students, as I was saying, I'm really in a writing class right now. I have a writing class going on at the moment. And one of the comedians in the class looks at this and he says, "Whoa, where did you find such a big marker?" So, you can look at it either way, as a regular size marker showing you how small or big the house is. And most of this is bought furniture, except I wrap the packages and I cut out the fabric for the rug, and then you can't see all the elements, but there's a loft above all this. So this is, by the way, a wonderful hobby if you want. When you're doing something like this, making a room like this or a house, you can't be doing anything else in your head. You are completely focused on this. It's relaxing in its own way. And I continued this particular model that I'm showing you here with the Christmas tree has just gone to a school in San Leandro, a local grammar school, and they auctioned it off last weekend. So that's my story. I'm still doing all of these things and having a good time with it, as well as enjoying my science and technology class at Golden Gate. It's called Science, Technology, and Cultural Change. I currently have 57 students, and it's another one of my very favorite things to do. So thank you.
Camille. Thank you so much. These are really interesting miniatures to look at. What a great, I don't want to call it a hobby, but a vocation. I'll open it up. Does anybody have any questions for Camille? We have somebody here in our classroom. If you tell me the question, I can relay it.
Would this apply to like floor plans too?
So the question is, will this apply to floor plans as well?
Can you write that in the chat? I'm not understanding it at all. Sorry.
Scary.
Oops, sorry. Repeat the question.
All right. Does this
Would this apply to floor plans with respect to scale?
Yes, yes, you can do this. Also, there are many different scales of miniatures. There's a 1/24th scale, a 1/44th scale, which, as you can imagine, is very, very tiny. But I know that that this is useful for draftspeople, for architects to do it. You see models all the time that, of course, are much more elaborate than this. But yes, this technique is absolutely useful. For me, it's just fun and a hobby. And I'd like to bring my novels to life, so to speak.
I can see we can do that. Thank you, Camille. And thank you for joining us in our IPS and our secret lives of our academics. This
I need
really
to go back to class. I hope you have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thanks, Camille. And as Camille leaves, I'd like to introduce Teri Halliwell, who's going to talk about daydreaming. Welcome, Teri.
Hi everyone. I wish I was there today, but I was diagnosed with COVID last week. So I'm still quarantining. It's hard, but nevertheless, I am very happy to be here today and connect with you and share with you a piece of my soul. A daydreamer's world is filled with chaos, good and bad. But mostly in there, I'm all that I can't be and live all that I will never will. I am a singer, a dancer, an actress, a collective genius like Leonardo da Vinci that leaves a distinctive mark on this world. Who knew that a paper and pen can have so much power? When I don't fly among the clouds and have to deal with the reality of being myself, there is nothing but pain really overflowing every fiber of my being. I was bullied. I lost friends. I was left behind. I tried and lost. I loved someone I couldn't have. Break me apart, and all you get is tears from sadness. These tears were translated into forms of short stories while working on my Master of Fine Arts degree at the University of San Francisco. Complicità, which means complicity in Italian, is my manifesto on tormenting. Futile love that is never meant to be, lies breeding hopes on something that will never flourish, death being the only salvation from this reality. Death interests me. I was once very eager to meet him, to run into his sweet hug in order to break this weight that was holding me down. But I decided to give writing a second chance. Complicità is this chance. Discovering the writer me and the limitations of my own world. And at this point, I would like to give you a little bit background on what Complicità sort of like consists of. It's a collection of short stories that play around with form and style. It's mainly about young women who battle with loss, betrayal, rejection, and manipulation. Death is a central theme throughout this collection, and it is inexorably connected with the stories, taking the form of murder, suicide, natural death, and even life beyond the grave. The search for acceptance, identity, understanding, and compassion is in form of plots that range from sci-fi to mystery, drama, and the romance. The main characters are imprisoned in inevitable circumstances and strive to move forward or not when there is no hope left. The structure of larger stories is broken up by 1 to 2 sentence stories, serving as intervals that follow the same dramatic tone and emphasize the fear of the uncertain future and the inescapability of the past. So basically, I try to create 2 sentence stories, and then the rest is at the reader's imagination to read and continue. So aside from storytelling, I'm also writing for the Power of the Patient Project, the National Library of Patient Rights and Advocacy, which is an online magazine on medical issues, as well as hosting a web series for the same outlet with prominent healthcare experts. So I guess being reminded of the mortality of our being makes my life a little bit more tolerable. And that's my sort of like introduction to my world. And I invite questions that you may have.
Questions even from our participants?
Oh, I have a question.
Yes,
So-
we have a question from the gallery here.
Sure.
Can I get a master's in psychology even though I have a bachelor's in accounting?
So that's not a question for this forum, but we can, before the end of the day, can introduce you to somebody who can answer that question for you.
Oh.
It was a different kind of question. It's okay.
Any other questions for Teri?
Yes, Doris.
Yes, I was curious if you tried to monetize your daydreams and your beyond perhaps writing about them. For example, with increased usage of Second Life or similar technologies online, some people live in quite an imaginative virtual world through virtual reality and related technologies. I'm just curious if you've explored that at all.
No, I haven't. And that sounds like a very good idea, since I primarily color, with my words and whatever is going on in my head. But it is a world that it's very tough for me to deal with. And there's a lot of darkness in there. That's why I haven't written since 2019, which is basically when I finished this collection. It was a hard sort of like, let's say, experience to recover from. And when I opened the door to this, then other things come out. So I will definitely explore it. If you can give me some links to it or some other form of reference, I am happy to read more about it.
Well, if I find something, I'll let you know, but it just, you know, I'm just seeing in the media online, just mainstream news and comments about how some children, 10, 12 years old, are actually purchasing designer clothes for their avatars in the virtual world, such a Second Life. So anyhow, I mean, it's just a thought. It seems to me one could live a very vivid imaginary life today.
Does it cost?
Oh, trust me, when you have like a world like this to live in, then you'll take it far, far, way, way far that you can ever imagine. And the hardest part is that when you read and keep on reading novels and stories from, you know, Wolfgang Goethe, Dickens, Shakespeare, and you see how they manage their creativity and imagination and this wonderful, you know, piece of work, then you see that there is just way too much pain in most of us. So yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to talk about it, but it's also very hard for me to sort of like, you know, control it in a way. But I am more than happy to see if I can put my word out there and see if I can reach other souls who have been tormented like I have, and perhaps find solace in my words. Even if one person finds solace, it means that I have done my part. So
Yeah, you might find some communities, shall we say, out in the online world. Perhaps you already have, but there may be more.
we'll see. Yeah,
Thank you.
of
Thank you,
course.
Teri. Thank you for just introducing us to this other way of thinking, this other world. So we're going to move a little on here, and I'm going to introduce Dan Clurman, who just has a new book out, maybe related, which is Let's Talk About the Essential Guides to Skillful Communication. Truth be told, we've had Dan several times now as a presenter, and I'm really thrilled to have him back. So Dan, take it away.
Thanks, Sue-Ann. So yes, have a new book out, not that new, came out in late August, called Let's Talk, An Essential Guide to Skillful Communication. And this book, which I'll show you in a minute, is one that my wife and I, we've taught together for 35 years, we finally decided to put our work in a book form because everyone kept asking us, is there a good book on this topic? And we said, there's not any book that covers what we do. And so we ended up writing it. It took us 6 years to write it. Started out as a small project and kept getting bigger. And today I thought I'd just go over one of the principles from the book that I think makes a big difference in people's communication, interpersonal communication. Our book itself turned into a almost like a reference book, because we not only cover interpersonal communication, we talk about its applications in terms of couples and couples conflicts, parenting, in terms of digital communication, diversity issues in times of health and in times of sickness, and spirituality. So we apply the interpersonal communication skills across a lot of different areas and look at how they can help people get along better, basically, and reduce suffering. So I'll share a screen and just go over a principle. Here's the book cover. And if you're interested in knowing more, reading some of the content of the book, you can go to our website, letstalkmethod.com. We also have I think a pretty good podcast with Dan Harris, formerly the anchor of ABC News Nightline, who started a company called 10% Happier. and he interviews us about our work in the book, and you can get a pretty good snapshot of it in an hour. And this is my co-author, Mudita. So one of the key principles in communication is that it occurs in a loop, meaning that when I'm talking with someone else, I'm noticing how what I'm saying is affecting that person. And based on what that person says or does, how they react, I will modify what I say or do next in the conversation. And this seems to me like pretty common sense, that we're all interdependent. We like to be, if possible, interdependent in positive ways. We like to know that we're mutually affecting each other and mutually understanding each other. So it seems like loop communication makes sense, pretty important to understand. And yet, a lot of the way communication is modeled to us in our culture is what I would call one-way communication, where someone goes on talking, and you see this modeled, for example, on TV shows, news shows, commentary shows, and they don't pay that much attention to the responses they're getting back to what they're saying. And they might give it lip service, but basically people are, especially in the media, are sort of waiting to get their sound bites in. And so they're not establishing a lot of a loop with each other, going for mutual understanding. They're often oriented towards saying what they have to say, and basically I've said what I have to say, I'm done. But really, in effective communication, if we really want to be attuned to developing a dialogue, we need to be in a loop. That is, we need to be attentive to how what we're saying is affecting someone else. So key principle, simple, yet it can be often ignored. And so one of the ways that takes place in communication with people is when people, what we call flood. That is something that I'm somewhat doing right now as I'm talking, which is going on a bit long to get this out and not quite being in a loop with everybody. That's one of the liabilities of being on Zoom and presenting, where people talk in pages rather than paragraphs. And that will produce or promote one-way communication, as opposed to what we call chunking. That is, speaking in paragraphs, throwing in a pause, and allowing the other person to respond both verbally and or non-verbally. And as a speaker, I would be picking up on those messages coming back. Someone raises an eyebrow and has a puzzled look on their face as I'm talking. So that means before I go on, I need to check whether there's something that they're understanding or not understanding, if they have a question. So this aspect of flooding versus chunking is just a simple way in which we can monitor how well that loop aspect of the communication is occurring when we're talking with somebody. So it's a important thing to remember that if you want to encourage loop communication, chunk your messages. That is, throw in the pauses and look at your listener. So that just went on for quite a bit there. That was an example of maybe going on too much. And now I'm going to pause and just have this open it up to questions about this principle or anything around communication, interpersonal communication, that this very brief presentation is maybe evoking for you.
Yes, we have somebody in the gallery here. If you tell me a question, I can repeat it.
Does Let's Talk cover text messaging?
It does. Yep. One of the things, we have a whole chapter on digital communication and its impact on communication in general, but particularly on where it's useful, where different kinds of digital communication can be useful, and where it can become a liability. Particularly texting, which has become so popular. It's very good for covering logistical, convenient exchanges where you really want to get some kind of data to people back and forth. But in terms of what we sometimes refer to in our book as evocative communication, the richness of face-to-face, interpersonal communication, sometimes being in the presence of someone. Texting is very limited in that sense. So from a communication point of view, it's very important to choose a medium that's suited for what your goals are in the interaction. So that's just, go ahead, sorry.
Was it asking for other questions?
How about voice communication over a telephone?
Yeah, so voice communication on a telephone is in some ways more evocative than texting because you can hear the tone of and the pacing and the pitch of the voice, and it's very expressive. And that aspect is stripped out in texting. And also with a phone call, you have the synchronous immediacy of the back and forth loop. I mean, texting is asynchronous. It can be pretty rapid going back and forth. But when we're on the phone talking, or in this video, for example, just in Zoom, we can have very immediate feedback to each other and be sensitized to each other's responses in the moment. And that's more powerful for evocative communication, which is particularly attuned to emotional aspects of the communication.
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think people are more comfortable speaking in a chunking version or a flooding version? Or is that pertain to the individual, whether they just want to be heard and not engage?
I think whether you have a flooding or a chunking style depends a lot on what was modeled to you when you were growing up, when you were in formative development. You know, I had parents who tended to flood. I developed a flooding style. When I encountered the communication work, I realized this is not going to be that effective, and I had to get more into a loop style. But it took some training, basically, to become sensitized to that. I had the assumption, and this often goes with people who flood, that if I keep saying more, somehow that's going to enhance understanding, mutual understanding. But it doesn't. It has the opposite effect, because when you flood, the listener starts to drop out. They're wondering, when am I going to get into this conversation? Can I participate in it? Can I influence the speaker? So actually, flooding is less useful for creating mutual understanding. And it's not, I would say that's not a particular motivation one way or the other. It's often just what we were exposed to.
So we have a question in the chat from Barry that asks, look how sarcasm plays out in different forms. Sarcasm in text is often confused versus phone versus face-to-face.
And so what's the question about that? Or is that a comment on the process?
About sarcasm.
It's more a comment on the idea that illustrates what your point is, and the idea of digital versus in person is we can use sarcasm as a great example of how we see miscommunication come through just the words, in a way that sarcasm in person is always quite clear.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's the effect is in some ways when you're using a real-time synchronous communication like voice, phone, video chat, in person, you get the immediacy of the effect of sarcasm, and it affects the back and forth quality. Because with texting, you have that asynchronous delayed aspect. It's a little harder to discern, and it's harder to know the effect. One of the problems with digital communication is you can curate your responses as well. And sometimes people try to create more ideal responses back and forth. They don't like the messiness, in a way, of more improvisational, face-to-face, real-time conversations. And it's interesting, there's a psychology professor at MIT, Sherry Turkle, who said that that's a problem in terms of our development, that a lot of the ways we develop and kind of mature as human beings is we have to deal with the messiness of conversations at times, the ambiguity. We have to we discover who we are, who the other person is. And one of her concerns with texting and social media, and she's not anti-technology, is that people are missing out on opportunities to develop themselves as human beings as they gravitate more frequently to digital communication. And I've seen that with younger, I teach business communication at UC Berkeley too. I've seen that with people in a younger generation who struggle more with interpersonal, face-to-face, real-time conversations. Well, I think my time might be up. if you have any other questions, you can always email me at that letstalkmethod@gmail.com. And there's a lot more to read, and you can listen to I think the podcast interview is very, very rich. We did with Dan Harris, if you want to get a fuller sense of the concepts of the book too.
Thank you, Dan. It was, congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
I know, a work in progress for quite some time in the labor of life. So thank you for joining us. So now I'm going to move forward and introduce another colleague who's also a former presenter with us, which is Jay Rooney.
Hi, Sue-Ann. Thanks for facilitating this and for the invitation. Just give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that? Yep. Okay. So, hello, everyone. My name is Jay Rooney, as Sue-Ann just mentioned, and I publish Game and Word, which is a weekly ezine and companion podcast on video games. Yes, that's right, video games. I launched it on January 1st, 2022, so it'll be 1 year on New Year's Day. And I talk about video games, but also not really. I talk about the intersection of video games with the arts, sciences, and humanities. And in many ways, the games are really kind of a means to an end. And so, and really just, thanks, Josie, as a kind of like launch board or springboard into some very deep topics. The name, in case you're wondering, is a pun on Game and Watch, which is a series of handheld gaming devices released by Nintendo in the 1980s. So, why did I choose this particular topic? Well, as you might surmise, I am a gamer, a big time gamer, and I'm not alone in this. There's been a lot of recent research that has shown just how much gaming as a hobby has grown, certainly since I was a kid and first started playing them. About 80% of people in the US have played some form of game in the past year, some form of video game. This includes things like browser games and mobile games, right? So your Candy Crush sagas and et cetera. Right, so that's almost 200 million people, right? Worldwide, that figure is 40%, which is 3.1 billion people who play video games in some form or another. And, it's not just like young dudes playing them either. In the US, at least, 41% of gamers are female. And the average age of US gamers is 35 to 44 years. These are numbers from 2020. So they've almost certainly increased since then. And yet, what do people usually think of when they hear the word gamer, right? Well, chances are something like this, all right? So someone immature, antisocial, probably male, doesn't shower and trolls people on the internet, when really gamers look just like you and me, right? Similarly, games themselves are a surprisingly contentious issue. Every time you hear mainstream, or most times that you hear mainstream media talk about games, it's usually in the context of what harm is it causing, all right? At best, it's a childish waste of time, and at worst, it's an addictive and ultra-violent rot, right? That is ruining the minds of young people. But to those of us who play games, we see it very differently, right? They're fun, right? It can even have therapeutic applications. They're a key driver of technological innovation. They have intrinsic value, right? Artistic value, narrative value, and educational value. And at the end of the day, even absent all that, they're a mass medium like any other, like film, music, or literature, right? Ergo, this newsletter, right? So my mission with Game and Word is to basically to elevate the discourse around gaming, to educate the public about video games' artistic, narrative, and educational merits, and also to educate my fellow gamers on the different artistic, literary, scientific, philosophical, and even spiritual influences behind their favorite games, thus creating a safe, thoughtful, and non-toxic space to hold those conversations and to build bridges between the two camps. And ultimately, this is all in the service of contributing to I would say what most gamers' holy grail, which is finally the recognition by wider society of video games as a legitimate art form. So so I look at games from a variety of angles, right? So some of my more popular articles deal with things like games as related to psychology, sociology, economics, archaeology. My most recent series is an analysis of the Chrono series, explorations of fate, choice, and the nature of time, right? Really deep stuff that you wouldn't really think, games could explore if you haven't experienced it for yourself. Similarly with the podcast, I also invite notable academics and people in the game industry to give their perspectives on the topics I discuss. People seem to like it, right? I get a lot of feedback on how, from gamers on how much it's kind of like it's made them think about their favorite games in new ways, and likewise from general public. And it's also been it's also been very informational and educational for them as well. Game and Word was featured as a Substack featured publication earlier in May, which was awesome and really very validating towards my mission, and we continue to grow. All right. I took this screenshot on Friday. I haven't checked my numbers today, but I've probably breached 800 subscribers by this point. 54 of which actually pay me money to do this. So if you want to read it for yourself, I am on Substack at gameandword.substack.com. You can also listen to the podcast there or search for it on all the major podcasting platforms. It's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, etc. And also I've started doing more video as well. And so I have a YouTube channel, and so there'll be more of that to come in the future. Finally, I am actively seeking partnerships, right? Both in terms of content production, advertising, sponsorships, grants, and consulting opportunities. I teach marketing and communications, and there's a lot of potential applications here that involve gaming. So that's about it. Get in touch with me. My contact info is my email is gameandword@substack.com, and my socials are linktree.e/gameandword. Thank you.
So it looks like Teri has a question.
Yes.
There you go. I'm muting myself. Hi, Jay.
Teri.
Have you, let's say, addressed splatter and the necessity of splatter in video games, such like Evil? Have you heard of Evil? It was a horror game back in 2000 something. It was recent. 17, right? Or 18, I don't remember. So I love games, and I love horror games, especially like Evil, which are very gory. Then there's another one with the Asylum that I don't really remember, and it's the game through the point of view of the player that he has
Outlast.
time mode. Yes, Outlast. I love this video game. Oh my god, I love everything about it because there is a need for this splatter and this gore. So my question to you is, have you addressed the necessity of gore and that it makes sense in the game sometimes, and not just for fun?
Yeah, totally. That's a very good question, and I haven't quite delved into the necessity of it, but I think that's a valid point, and I think you could make a similar comparison, to horror movies, right? Some of which are very gory and disturbing, right? And sure, it's not for everyone, right? Kids probably shouldn't watch those movies, right? But their artistic merits are not questioned in the same way
But it
that
makes sense sometimes.
similar video games. It does. It absolutely does. Like with all art, right? There should be room to be able to explore these themes, right? And with some games, especially a lot of horror games, there's if it didn't have the splatter, so to speak, it just wouldn't be that same game, right? So yeah, I think it's like like in any medium, if it's appropriate to the work, right, and if it's necessary for the work, then there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that.
I think that will be a nice topic for your website as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Anyone else? Oh, I think
Yes.
Doris has her. Yeah.
Yes, I'm wondering if you have, if you're aware of studies about any connection between video games and violence, is there any correlation, and if so, what, between, say, some of the video games and crime?
Right. So yes. So so video game research is fascinating because it's it's very nascent, right? So there is still in many ways a lot of research that needs to be done, and there's the few research that there is tends to suffer from a lot of methodological flaws and really kind of clear bias on the parts of the researchers, both arguing for and against that hypothesis. So it's very hard to kind of parse out, what the signal is and amidst all that noise. But as of right now, the general, I wouldn't say consensus, but the research seems to indicate that if there is such a correlation, then it's basically negligible, but certainly not causal. And again, it's kind of like it's kind of like the same, like with so many movies are violent as well, right? And some of us probably probably watched some pretty violent movies back in our day, but didn't lead us to become murderers as well. Like also, I played up great playing like Grand Theft Auto and Doom and all those. And last I checked, I've never murdered anyone. All right. I think the whole thing with violence and, I guess and probably why, violent games seem to perform so well. I think it really ultimately comes down to just the fact that we as a society just generally glorify violence. And so I think it's more kind of like a symptom rather than a cause of how violent we are as a society. I think it's much more intrinsic, and since art imitates life, it's reflected. It's reflected that way in games. But I actually, if you go to my podcast and search for the interview with Dr. Pete Etchells, we actually do dive quite deeply into this, and his book Lost in a Good Game actually does dive pretty deep into into this research. So I definitely recommend that as if you want to dive a little deeper.
Dan, we have another question from Dan.
Yes, I'm curious if I'm not in the world of gaming that hardly at all. I'm curious. I remember seeing a while back there was a game called Wild Divine. Are you familiar with that?
Wild Divine.
Might be too old.
No, doesn't ring a bell, but
okay. Are there games that sort of enhance that sense of human development in terms of, say, things like critical thinking or metacognition, where the game might have a quantitative side to it, but it's also really working on a qualitative aspect of helping people develop new perspectives about their world, their ways of viewing their own assumptions, biases, things like that.
Yeah. So I think in that latter sense of kind of helping others develop new perspectives, absolutely, 100%. There's I could even, this is something I've experienced personally when, when my daughter was born, she had to go through 2 open heart surgeries in the first 6 months of her life. And it was one particular game, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which Irene has mentioned in the chat, that was very therapeutic for me, and in many ways saved my sanity, and has a very Zen-ness quality to it that that I found certainly helped cultivate my own mindfulness. And I've written a couple of articles on that game before Game and Word.
Could you say the name of the game again? What's the name of the game?
The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild.
Breath of the Wild. Okay.
Yes.
And that would be a game that you'd recommend for exploring that idea of perspective taking.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And there's so many too. It's almost impossible to list them all. But lately, and that's the other side of gaming people don't really know about too, right? Kind of we all since the media tends to fixate on kind of the violent games, we don't hear about all the other types of games out there that are really very wholesome and kind of and made with a certain imbued with the developers a sense of empathy, right? And used to kind of communicate their experience and their perspectives, which being an interactive medium, those stories can be much more powerful than they would in other mediums. As far as the enhancing intelligence and cognition, that's another area where the research is very muddled. And kind of it makes intuitive sense that they would, but the research so far is very inconclusive. It doesn't worsen any of it, but likely, the effect to which it does improve, things like intelligence, or what a cognition, hand-eye coordination, all that stuff, is probably pretty small. But even then, just the games. Just in the nature of games themselves as a storytelling vehicle, I would say they certainly can enhance someone's mind, but more in the latter way you mentioned, and in terms of allowing you to experience different perspectives and hear about and hear people's stories.
Great.
So thank you. I think this is going to be fodder for a whole event in itself. I think going forward, I think it'll be a really interesting subject matter on so many levels. So thank you for at least opening the door to that conversation.
Yeah,
Sorry that
thanks,
we
Suzanne.
but we're going to move on now to Barry. And thank you, Jay. Barry, I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay, so I'm a visual artist. I teach art history, Art 50 at Golden Gate, but my main way of working is printmaking, painting, printmaking, sculpture, all part of the tradition of image making in the arts. And I play music. I'm very interested in collaboration, spontaneous collaboration, a very loose way of working where it's very much like a dialogue, more like the, not the, whatchamacallit, I forgot the two terms you used, Dan, but the one that involves much more of an interaction. So what I've been doing, I specialize in a technique called monotype, which is where you paint on a clear or metal surface, you create a series of marks till you're satisfied with it, adding and subtracting, and then you run it through a press, transfer it to the paper, and there's ink that's left, a ghost print that you can continue to work on. So that becomes one way to establish a dialogue with yourself. It's not the most well-known of techniques but I have traveled to Cuba to do this, in Chile. And this year, actually just last October, a month ago, I went to Chile to work with 11 different artists there, where the idea was that we would work collaboratively on every image. Now, because there was a language barrier for some of us, that made the challenge even more interesting, because we wouldn't be able to discuss what we were going to do ahead of time. We just start working. And as with the process, you apply ink and the other person can wipe it away and add their lines and wipe away and keep changing the process. So the whole idea was also to get artists to let go of their control and ownership of the image or the mark. Visual artists tend to be very particular about, I made those marks, that's important, I need to keep those. But what I wanted to see happen was where everybody became one mind and we worked together to create a series of work. So the goal of this project, as it was proposed, is we did two shows. Our first exhibition in Santiago was just the artists who had been invited was their work. And we saw each other's work at that point. And that was the introduction in many ways. At least 8 of the artists I hadn't even seen before, and I was the coordinator of the exhibition. Then we went and spent 10 days in a town called Requinoa, which is south of Santiago, on an old walnut farm, where all we had to do was do artwork and eat and drink. It was Chile. So we spent all this time creating images. The first day, I did a demo of the technique, and then I did a demo of the exchange with a student I had worked with before, a co-artist I'd worked before, where I started, and after 2 songs, I handed the plate to her. 2 more songs, she handed it back to me until we both looked at each other and said, it's ready to print. Then we printed it and took the ink that was left and continued with this process. Then, having modeled this behavior, we split up into groups and everybody created the work. From there, the next day was based on a variation of the technique where one of the other artists showed the idea of cardboard dry point. So everybody made a matrix, their image, but then they could grab other people's pieces and print on top of it. Sort of take possession and say, this will add to it. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. The third day, we had a dancer, my wife, do 30 minutes of improv, just dancing, and everybody did drawings from that. And then we went inside and used those as the starting point for the dialogue of creating prints. So we continued in this manner for 7 days, with the new activity also being that we would hang up all the work that had been done and pick out the show. We had an exhibition lined up where we were going to deliver 30 pieces. And by the third day, we had about 71 pieces done. So we put them all up and everybody got to pick 3 that they considered exhibition worthy. We ended up with, well, say about 28. People were encouraged not to pick something that someone else had picked because, you know, duplicating would not improve its chances of being in the show, but, you know, they could get more into it. Then each day after that, if you did something or if someone did something that you thought should be in the show, you not only put it in the gallery that had all the work up, you had to take down the one that it would replace, which led to a lot of interesting discussions depending upon which pieces everybody had more ownership of. So we did that for the rest of the time until we had an exhibition of 30 pieces out of 110 that we had created. And we hung that exhibition in Valparaiso, where it opened up in a gallery called Casa Plan, which is also a great collaborative space. So in the idea of working together, we worked in many ways like musicians, where someone starts a riff, starts playing, and then everybody else plays off of it. And if you're listening really well, you change what you're doing based on what someone else is doing. If the drummer gets a little funky and decides to emphasize a different part of the measure, you either give him more space there or you accentuate what he's doing. So I was trying to bring this to the visual arts, to a community that we all had different experiences coming in. I'd had some of these people had been students of mine the year before in Chile. Others, just a couple didn't even know the process at all. And a couple were very experienced with it, and see if we could create work as a collective. The other aspect that I was really pleased with, so for the exhibition in Valparaiso, in the beginning, there was a statement and it listed everybody who participated, but there was no credit given to any individual piece. The rules were that every piece had to have at least 2 sets of hands that worked on it. So there wasn't any, piece that was just Caddy, who was one artist who was very strong-willed. He had to have had someone else work on it before it could be considered for the exhibition. But there was no attribution of ownership of any of these pieces. It was done by all of us, so anybody visiting, unless they knew the artist's hand very well, just had to accept the collective and see if it worked together as a collective. If you go to Instagram and go to To Be Determined Chile, you will see a lot of the images and such. That was the hashtag we used. And the title itself also spoke to this. When I was talking about in the planning stage with the print atelier in Santiago that I was working with, she kept asking me, what's the title? And I said, I'll get there, TBA and TBD. And then all of a sudden I said, no, that's the title, To Be Determined, because we have no idea what's going to result out of this. It could be a total abject failure, but we're going to see. And now that's the series, because we're going to go do it again in April 2024, and we hope to turn it into an ongoing series. So yeah, it's an interest in the visual arts, the creative process, in how any artwork, unless it's stuck right into a drawer, never to be shown, is a sense of communication, is a way of explaining yourself or intriguing or challenging somebody else, creating an environment for a dialogue. But also with this is the idea that we don't have to have the ownership or pride as part of it. It's really becomes just, what is the image? I mean, we walk into a museum, we want to know who did what. We go to a gallery, and one of the first things most people do is look at the name, look at what that person has to say. Now here, it was just really in the dialogue with the image. These can be seen again at To Be Determined Chile. Questions? I'll end it right there.
Questions from the gallery? I think everybody's just thinking Chile. The beauty of that country.
It was incredibly beautiful doing that, working there. We did have several days of being shown around as tourists because there's 3 Americans and 9 Chileans. One who we paid for her to be there since she worked as my translator, since I speak no Spanish, which is interesting to lead a program in another country when you don't speak the language. So it was beautiful.
It goes and wraps back to the communications, to the artwork, and to several of our speakers today.
Yeah, it was.
From daydreaming to something that's right in front of you. So thank you, Barry. I'm going to now
You're welcome.
introduce our final speaker of today, and our final look at the secret lives of our professors, our adjuncts, and our staff. And I think we're getting a pretty good peek into there.
Is it okay if I sit
Yep.
in your
Yep.
esteemed
You
spot?
have the chair. It's all
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne. I'm so impressed by all of you, and Barry, that was just a wonderful presentation. Jay, thank you so much for sharing your vulnerability and the way in which you've used games to both soothe grief and not knowing, and also provide inspiration. Everybody has really provided something special here. So I'm grateful for the chance to add my 2 cents. So I'm a professor and I'm the Dean of Undergraduate Studies here. I am a psychotherapist, and so I chair the psychology department here and have worked in clinical practice for 2 decades. But perhaps you didn't know, my first doctorate was actually in philosophy. And so I went to Cal and was very interested in the study of epistemology. How do we know? It was a topic, knowing, for me, that I struggled with all my life. So I got very interested in symbolic logic, inferential logic, and how is it that we can know something with a capital K, if at all? One of the challenges, of course, to epistemological research is that you get different kinds of standards, different kinds of ways of mooring beliefs. And it was one such conversation I had with my dissertation director, where he said, Nate, you keep talking about how do we know what's most important. Why don't you go serve someone who's at the precipice of knowing that which we know best, which is that we're mortal creatures. And I was kind of fuzzy there for a second, and he said, Nate, what I'm saying is I think you ought to go be a hospice volunteer and actually go serve someone who's dying and see if that has something to teach you about what it is that you think you know or don't know. So I did. And that experience at Zen Hospice Project over at Laguna in Page 26 years ago really changed my life. And so I went back, did it all over again in psychology, and have worked in clinical practice, as I say, treating personality disorders, depression, generalized anxiety, but I've worked a lot with people at the end of life. So I think Sue-Ann first asked me to come because I just did an article around advanced care planning, which is really the topic of how to discuss with professionals in your family things that are important to you, especially at the end of life. And you may focus on the kinds of treatments you want or don't want, or where you want to be, or who you want to be there. But the real importance of these conversations to me is to really undergird the person's autonomy, to provide information, context, answer questions, and to really let them teach us about what it's like to be them. As a caregiver, my job is to serve, support, and sojourn with, not to make decisions for, if I can help it. And so that sort of opening up of the heart, if you like, that I learned in hospice, this very life-affirming, love-affirming realization around the fact that, you know, epistemologically, we know we're going to die. And so what do we do with that information and that knowledge? And so we know that death isn't so much discussed. It's a little bit like some of us who can recall, you know, when sex was scandalous, to say outright. We used to have a game show called the Newlywed Show in the 80s. It was the most popular game show ever, and you couldn't say sex on the show, and the whole show was predicated on sex. So death has sort of replaced that, and I don't want to get into the marrow or consequences of implications of grief and mourning and bereavement here in this talk. What I really want to do is just step back and just give you three things that I noted in this article that was through Springer Press, having to do with advanced care planning. These are three principles, if you'd like, that have emerged in my time with the dying. The first principle is don't wait. So don't wait oftentimes comes to us as a sort of beseeching that there are things left to do. And of course, it could mean that finishing a poem, finishing a trip, making amends, enjoying a dinner, travel. But I actually don't mean those things, although they're important. Don't wait, to me, as a psychologist, is more intimate than that even. It's how you feel. That is to say, if it's important to you, as it is to me, to feel equanimity, passion, empathy, gratitude, why would I wait? Irrespective of the context, why would I wait to feel these things? I used to think, prior to my hospice experience, about, oh, you know, teaching in a fall or spring semester, and I would think to myself, I can't wait until this semester is over. These papers are done. Wow, I'm going to feel so much better. I'm going to feel like a weight is lifted. I'm going to feel a reprieve. Well, maybe, maybe not. Who knows how you feel 3 months from now or 2 months from now? Feeling is always a now proposition. There's no need to wait. If the objective is to find whatever you need by feeling happiness or groundedness, or that it's all worthwhile, now's your chance. Now's your chance. And how do we do that? Well, there are a variety of ways you can onboard emotional experiences that you want. We call these habits, habits of mind, habits of spirit, physical habits, habits of practice, habits of nutrition. But we can bring these feeling states on in the moment, which again is the only time you could ever experience it. And so I would just offer that up, that don't wait is one principle that has been very important to me in my work, particularly those in hospice and palliative care. The second principle that has come up may sound a bit strange, and that is to try to find a place of rest in the middle of things. So gosh, I mean, with technology, which in many respects is sold as a labor-saving device, I find myself now even busier than I was before the internet. In fact, exponentially so. I'm connected and networked in ways that I can't keep up with. And if you're like me, if I just open my inbox, I mean, just wait half a second and there'll be a new message from somebody somewhere. And so we're in the flux of relationships, some that are important, some that maybe aren't. Work, all the roles that we take up, partner, parent, you name it, professor. And amidst all of this swirl, at least for me, I can get so tipping forward into the future of all the projects that I've got going that I miss the now. I miss what's happening right here in this moment. And when I do that, I miss my chance, for one, to be present to what's really here, and two, to actually have the kind of affective resonance with the importance and weight of this moment that's available all the time. It need not be a crisis for this to feel important. And I don't have to have everything perfectly organized for me to feel grateful. Instead, why wouldn't I? Why wouldn't I aspire to find a place of rest? It doesn't mean disengagement, it's the opposite. Amidst all of the other things that are going on, to just recognize the privilege of being able to, for one, be here with you now. There's no other place I'd rather be. So finding a place of rest you can interpret and apply in your own ways. It may be indeed sleeping, taking the nap. So be it. I like naps. I mean more sort of in the largest sense possible of self-care, that there's an opportunity that we carry with us to have always what's most important with us ready at hand. Last principle, the one that really may sound contradictory given my epistemological leanings. I actually, for this third principle, I wrote about what I call cultivating the don't know mind. So as a professor, there's an expectation, maybe even as dean, there's a higher expectation that I know what I'm talking about, or that there are specializations that I have that I can help give information or insight to others around. But gosh, there's a lot of not knowing out there. In fact, most of life in my experience is not knowing, mystery, places, people, things, events that I don't have control over. And so for me, cultivating the don't know mind looks a little bit like this. There are some classes now that I've had the chance to teach 100 times, no kidding. And those classes are fun. And when I sort of erect the class and get it sort of, presented as a mosaic of ideas and images and readings and so forth, I know my way around that territory pretty well. And it's fun and it's engaging. And I feel a sense of familiarity. But what's even more exciting to me is when I've got the student in class who asks the question that I haven't thought of before. Maybe they actually highlight a problem or an inefficiency or something around my presentation that's not right. The beginner's mind, as opposed to the expert mind, is actually my better friend. Rather than feeling like I've got to present the first and last word in a lecture or in a presentation like this, instead, what's really going on is I'm listening and learning from you just as much as you're listening, perhaps, and learning to me. And I've got a lot I need to know. What it's like to be you, what your ideas are, Barry's beautiful metaphor of nobody owns this piece of work. This is an expression of many hands. So the beginner's mind, if you think about the first time you took a calculus class, if you were like me, or underwater basket weaving or whatever, and you say, gosh, I have no idea what this class is going to involve. Think about what that instructor could have said. They could have told you anything the first day. You just said, okay. But the mind that you had at that moment was full of tremendous possibility, tremendous creativity. You see, sometimes what happens at our worst when, or at least I've come to see, when I think I know something very well, I tend to be very routinized and scripted in my thinking. Here's how it's going to go, and I present it in a kind of way that's metered out and sort of ossified. It's much more fun to instead enter into a conversation and have there be a dynamic that's back and forth. And that requires a beginner's mind. Part of it's intellectual humility and emotional honesty, but a larger part of it is that, there's so many different perceptual acts happening around a given topic, even in calculus, where a beginner's mind, a mind that is set around teach me as opposed to let me talk, it lends itself, I think, to deeper learning, deeper engagement, deeper levels of critical thinking, more expansive creativity, and it's more fun. So these are a few principles that sort of revolved around this article as a constellation, if you'd like, that we're really trying to get at advanced care planning, particularly in dementia populations where a former self might have been talking to a future self about the kinds of interventions they want or don't want. But the through line in all of this, and what my close is here for us today, is just simply acknowledge, I think, that whether we're planning for something the end of life, or planning what we're going to have for lunch, planning for how we're going to show up to our kids or our significant others later, or how we want to be with others who are here right now on Zoom or in person. There is an opportunity, I think, to engage with a sense of gratitude in the moment. And that moment, whether we're talking former self and the future self, as my article was trying to get at, or whether we're here right now, this moment is very, very precious to me. And I'm anytime I forget that, I want to remind myself and get back on board. Grateful to be here with you all, especially. So thank you for your time. I'll stop there.
Questions?
Barry said he'd take all my questions, by the way, so you can ask me anything, but Barry's gonna give the responses. That's all right.
I don't know about that. So I do have is your topic really hits me at this moment, as I mentioned in the chat. I've just since the beginning of October, 2 family members died from long illnesses in hospice. And then we just had a 3rd family member, she's 95, so just entered hospice. But even the fact that I say she's 95 changes sort of how we as the people around are approaching it. And then there's there's the person themselves approaching it, and there's difficulties there because they feel an obligation to keep going for the people around, yet 2 of the 3, verbalized that they wanted to die. Then it was, and it's interesting to just the whole story discussion around the idea of dying and how do we treat it as a society. How do we, it has led to a lot of discussions between, those of us who are surviving this moment, how we're going to approach it as we get older. And a lot of introspection on what does it mean and how do we address it as a society. So yeah, thank you. That's
Thank you for sharing, Barry. And it gives me a chance to just say this. And some of you perhaps were raised this way too. I always grew up and whenever hospice or palliative care emerged, there was a kind of myth that I was taught, which was, well, that's where you go when there's no hope. On the contrary, I would argue that interdisciplinary, really good palliative care is precisely the place in our healthcare system that focuses on hope. Hope in terms of what is most important now to the patient and the patient's family, and doing that. It's living fully as to the extent that we've got for as deeply as we can. That's what good hospice and palliative care. It's not about removing options. It's about focusing on what's worth living for. Oftentimes now we've got research, including my own, where we've got good longitudinal data from colleagues that I've written with up at UCSF to show that if you get good hospice and palliative care, 2 things tend to happen. 1, you have fewer symptoms, which isn't surprising, fewer issues around pain, fewer undiagnosed symptoms around depression, anxiety. 2, people tend to live longer. Now, that's contrary to the way in which I was fed hospice. But anyhow, thanks, Barry, that gave me a chance to speak to that.
Well, thank you.
Thanks so much for your time, everybody. Much love to you.
Thank you, Nate. Thank you to all of our presenters, and thank you especially to Nate for that warm welcome in the beginning. It seems like we've gone through such a journey with our different presenters and where they've taken us today. So thank you so much for that. On behalf of all of us at the IPS and our Innovation and Practice Series at Gina School of Business and our undergraduate friends, thank you for joining us. We'll be sending out a recording of this proceeding sometime after the first of the year. I hope this is the first of our peek into the secret lives of our faculty, adjuncts, and staff. Who knows what we'll find coming up. And what other engaging conversations we can have based on what we.
And thank you to you, Sue Ann.
And Mike and Irene and Zenith and Sri, Hakeem, and all of us for doing this. This, I think, is our 100th IPS event since the end of 2017.
Oh,
so yeah. And so we like to do innovative things. If you've got good ideas, let us know, and hope to see you next time. Thank you so much for being here.